Come on, SCBC, let's put it together. Reverend Dr. Lakeesha Walrond.
Hey.
All right. Well, I want to ask a question that is on the heart of so many. Tell us about your amazing husband.
That is such a great opening.
Yes.
And I want to publicly say that I have never been publicly interviewed by a king before.
Oh. So let me give you all the backdrop to that statement. Pastor Lakeesha was preaching about her trip to South Africa and how she went to this village and the king wasn't there, but a prince was there. And she was going on and on about meeting this prince. And then she said, and I was sitting in the front row, and she said, I've never been in the presence of the prince before. I yelled out, yes, you have. And then her comeback was, well, no. She said, I'm in the presence of a king. So yes. I was like, go ahead and tell the truth and shame the devil. All right, listen. So this book, you just published this book.
Yes.
Wrote this book. Yes. It's part of a series, Let's Talk About It. Yeah. And this first installment is called My Body is Special.
Yes.
All right. Why did you do this book?
Well, first of all, I think that the issue of child sexual abuse is a subject that's not talked about as often as it should be. I am a survivor, and so this is my story. You know, I just remember reading in the Bible that all things work together for good for those who love the Lord and are called according to God's purpose. And in my mind, I never thought anything good could come from such a horrific event in my life. But God's word is true. And so we have this amazing book that is focused on giving adults the language to have these healthy conversations with children, because it can be a pretty intimidating conversation to have.
So the young girl in the book's name is Eva.
Yes.
Tell me about Eva.
So Eva is an amazing little girl. She is bright, she's beautiful, she's kind, she loves to laugh, she loves butterflies, lots of butterflies in the book. But she is basically sharing with readers a conversation that she's had with her mother, where her mother is telling her that her body is very special, she only gets one body, she has to take good care of that body, and that no one should be touching her in her special places on her body. And I like the language of it because she goes through, you know, not even mommies or daddies, no, not even mommies or daddies, not even brothers or sisters, not even people at church or people at work, not even friends or neighbors. No one should be touching a child in an inappropriate way. And that's the message that we've got to get to every child in this world.
Have you ever publicly talked about your own abuse?
I have. I've actually talked about it during sermons here at FCBC and at our former church, Zion Temple. And it's interesting, Pastor Mike, because I wrote this book in 2009, but it took me another 7-year, 8-year journey to get to the point where I was ready to share my story with the public. So it took me a journey from writing to getting to the point where I was actually comfortable putting this out for everyone.
And what was intimidating about it? What made it difficult? What made it what made it in the point that you wrote this, but it took a while to even share it? What made it so difficult?
Well, unfortunately, the statistics show that 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys will be molested by the time they are 18. And so it is very pervasive. But it's intimidating because unfortunately, the victim is still often blamed. Well, what were you wearing? Well, what were you doing? Well, why didn't you say something? Why didn't you scream? Why didn't you say stop? Why did you wait so long to tell your mother? Where was your mother? What was she doing? How could she let this happen? And so there's all of these kind of judgments that come your way when you speak up publicly. And those are the kinds of things that I had to work through and be prepared to stand and know that it wasn't my fault, and be able to tell every other survivor that it wasn't your fault. And no matter what anyone says or how anyone may try to judge you, there is nothing about a 9-year-old girl, which is the age when my molestation started, that is saying to an adult that I want you to touch me. That is not the language that's being expressed.
How long?
From the time I was 9 till I was 11. And so I just thought this was what, daddies did with their children because I didn't know anything different. And this was my stepfather, unfortunately. And so what happened was we have one aunt, Aunt Claudette, if you're watching, hey, who my family sends everyone to her when it's time to have this conversation about growing up and what it means to become a young lady. And she's having this conversation with me. She's got this book, she's showing me these pictures, and then she says to me, and so no one should be touching you. And so I looked up at her in my own innocence at 11 and says, not even daddies? And she looked at me with this look of horror. I will never forget that look. And that's when my journey of kind of talking about it began, because for all that time, because predators know what they're doing, they know how to keep you silent, they know how to keep you intimidated, they know how to keep you from feeling like this is something that's their fault. And so that's what he did. He did a great job of grooming me so that I would stay silent for far too long.
The woman, Lakeesha, what was the impact this had on you as a woman, you think, as you got older and started having a family and all of that?
So it had a tremendous impact. Personally, even in our relationship, as you well know, there were some things that were very difficult for me. Even after I had Jasmine particularly, and I came to you and said, please don't ever, put your hands on her because, things would not turn out well for you. And he was so offended. He was like, what? How could you say? But that was my experience. And so that caused a rift in our household for a while because you couldn't imagine how I could think that, right?
I couldn't.
Right, but as a survivor.
Let me stay focused on the host.
But, as a survivor, and so it also affected how I treated my children. I didn't let them have sleepovers. I didn't let them go to other people's houses very often. So I was very protective, an overprotective mother. So this, even though you're on the road to healing, it stays with you. And so every single day, there's a journey towards healing. I have a flashback. I'll have a memory. I'll be touched in a particular way and think about it in public or in private. And so it's a journey that continues. And I guess that's what I also want to let people know is that, don't get frustrated with yourself on your journey towards healing because it doesn't happen overnight. Your incident generally didn't happen overnight. Your healing won't happen overnight. So give yourself space and room to breathe, to be free, and to understand that your healing is a journey.
Why in particular do you think we are so hesitant in the church to talk about this issue?
Most of us just think that it just won't happen to us. We think that we have the right people around our children. We think that we're worshiping in a safe place. We think that our children are surrounded by people that love them. This kind of system that pushes us toward just believing and trusting that the people who love our children and show interest in our children would never do anything to hurt them. And so it's unfortunate because the Bible really is filled with cases of rape and abuse. And unfortunately, we don't hear those texts preached that often.
Churches sometimes lack the courage to talk about what we consider taboo, whether it's abuse, or like we talked this morning about domestic violence or sexuality. There's a hesitancy, and it's amazing how we use the language in church of so much of don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, and then at the same time we have congregations of people who are suffering, and sometimes suffering in silence because we refuse to give voice to these kinds of issues. And there's so many people who not only suffer, but then the flip side is so many people who are courageous, like yourself, who are able to talk about it and then share it. And then your stories empower other people. I mean, who do you want to, whose hands do you want to put this book in?
I want this book in the hands of every child in the world. What I would love to see is this book, after being read with a parent to a child or an adult to a child, that this book sits on this child's bookcase. That when that predator comes in the room and sees this book, he or she knows, I can't touch that one. One of the important things in the back of the book is that Eva gives children kind of this language, and we've come up with this say, do, go, tell. Say, do, go, tell.
Okay.
And I want it to be as popular as stop, drop, and roll. for our children, that they have the language, they know what to do. You say no and stop. You do run and scream. You go to a safe place, and you tell an adult that you trust.
Usually, I ask guests to share 3 things that they learn along the journey. But what are 3 things you would share, and this is on the spot, I don't want to put you on the spot, 3 things you would share with other survivors of childhood abuse?
Yeah. So the first thing I want to share, if there are survivors in the house and abroad, is that it wasn't your fault. It was not your fault. And if no one has ever told you that, I want to be the first to say it wasn't your fault. Yeah. Knowing that you don't have to stay stuck. And so for me, I've been in therapy. I've been in and out of therapy, talking to professionals who've been professionally trained to help me deal with my scars and the residual. And so I would recommend for anyone who's survived this incident to talk to someone. And the last thing I will say is don't be afraid to share your story. Sometimes, particularly as parents, we want to be so perfect for our children, right? And so perfect for those who are around us. But sometimes it's when we say, you know what, I've been broken, but God put me back together again. You know, this happened to me, but it didn't stop me from loving you.
Yeah.
That's where the power comes from. And then once you tell, you'll be surprised, and someone else will say, you know what, that happened to me too. But that conversation would have never taken place if we didn't have the courage to share our stories. And when we're sharing, it's not about necessarily how terrible the incident was, how terrible the person was, but it's more about how strong we are.
Yes.
And
yes.
how we were able to push ourselves
Yes.
forward and survive, and not only survive, but thrive. This book is me thriving, because I refuse to let anyone take the power that God has given me, and that's what I want to encourage other survivors to do.
My body is special. Come on, let's give it up for Pastor Lakeesha.